Welcome to Comfort and Growth, the podcast for people who are passionate about personal growth and productivity. And today we have our favorite guest. I have to say my favorite guest, right? Because it's my husband. Right now.
If I wasn't your husband, I would be your favorite guest.
Okay. We have Dr. Greg with us today, and we're going to be covering...
You're actually going to start like this.
Yes, I am. Why? Are you being judgy?
No, this is a bit weird.
Why is it weird?
Okay.
I'm a weird person. Deal with it. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most popular requests from our AMA, which is how to make exciting, interesting, and sparkling conversation. As you know, it's that time of the year where there's lots of social events and, people are getting a bit anxious from all the messages I'm receiving about having to go to these work-related events and have to make small talk, social conversation with senior stakeholders and their colleagues and that sort of stuff. So, Greg, do you ever feel anxious when you are in those situations, or do you have clients who are experiencing social anxiety?
Well, luckily enough, I don't have that problem. I have many other problems for other episodes. But of course, a lot of my clients have social anxiety. They're worrying about whether others think of them, if they would say something stupid, if they're going to be judged for what they're sharing, and oftentimes that can lead to them not saying anything in the first place, or avoiding the networking, or simply holding back.
Yeah, and what advice would you generally give for those people, even before we go into the specific tips?
Well, really good to remember is that most people are thinking about themselves a lot more than they are probably thinking about you in that instance.
So no one is thinking about you? That's encouraging advice, huh?
Well, it liberates you from being so self-conscious that they're constantly analyzing whether, your smile is appropriate, your story is exciting.
That's true.
They're much more worried about how they are actually coming across. So in essence, everybody is worried about how they are coming across. What that means, that liberates you from being so fixated on coming across in a particular way.
So what we're going to do today is cover some specific tips and techniques. And honestly, this is such a big topic that, we honestly could and do teach like 2-day workshops just on how to show up and find your voice and be more confident. But we're going to try to distill some practical principles for you. I think there are many, many different ways of being interesting, though, Greg. Can I share a story about...
You like oversharing.
I love oversharing.
I'm not gonna stop you.
So once we were hired to do an event for like a very big accounting firm, and there were many, many big global people, stakeholders in the room, and from the back of the room, I could see that Greg was talking to the big cheese. He was the big stakeholder that everyone was, bowing and scraping to. But I noticed that from Greg's body language, he was behaving in a very informal way. He was like, ha, 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 ha. And he was like slapping this guy on the shoulder. I don't even think that Greg knew who this guy was, right? And for me, I'm an investment banker by training. So I would have like researched everyone. I would have gone to their LinkedIn profile before the event. I would have seen what they look like, so I understand who's there. So anyway, I decide to rush over and see what Greg is talking about. So Greg, can you share with us what you were talking about?
No.
Yes. Be cooperative, Greg. Yeah, so there's this senior guy, and he was saying to Greg, hey, I heard that you're a psychologist. You must be good at making people cry. Are you going to make people cry today at the event? So Greg was like...
Well, making people cry is the easy part. The more challenging part is for me to help them stop crying.
No, Greg, that's not what you said. You said, yeah, of course I'm going to make them cry, but you're going to pay extra for me to make them stop. That is actually what you said, Greg. And I was like, oh my God, what is Greg saying? And then after that, but the senior stakeholder actually really enjoyed the conversation. He thought Greg was very funny. Then after that, he walked away, and I said, Greg, do you know who that was? And Greg says, yeah, of course. He was the DJ.
He's the MC.
You said he's the MC. And I said, Greg, he's not the freaking MC. He's the guy who's the big cheese of this entire organization. And Greg was like, oh, okay. But I think why I'm telling this anecdote is because we have very different styles.
Yes.
You genuinely are curious about people, you're quite playful, and you don't get intimidated by whoever it is, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether they're super senior or more junior in the company. They're all human beings. They have all kinds of issues and anxieties, and I just relate to them as fellow human beings.
You know why? I think it's because you see all these powerful people all the time end up in our office on the sofa crying about their mother and father with you, and that's why you're just like, oh, it's just another human, like that nothing phases you.
Yeah, I know they have all kinds of flaws and anxieties and are probably preoccupied how I perceive them, that I'm like, okay, I can just be myself with them.
Yeah, so being yourself
Don't
is
overanalyze, have fun.
your superpower.
I guess so.
I would say that you're consistently yourself, whereas my style tends to be a little more flexible. Could I say that when I'm talking to somebody, I'm always trying to change myself, or I'm somebody who's very who's quite interested in like mimicking other people, right?
Yes.
I code switch, I mimic people's accents, I love to play with sound. So it's something that is just naturally part of me, where I want to meet people where they are and I want to kind of dance with them. Yeah, but anyway, let's get back to the story, which is talking to people and making interesting conversation. So let's get back to first principles. When we are trying to make, interesting, persuasive conversation, Aristotle said there's basically 3 sort of persuasive appeals, right? Logos, ethos, and pathos. And what this means is, number 1, logos means that when you're talking to someone, you're constantly judging, like, do they make sense? Are they clear? Is their message logical? Or do they make absolutely no sense and they're hard to follow? So that's logos, which is logic. The second one is ethos, which is, do I buy that person? As in, do I think that person is credible? Do I think that this person is someone who knows what they're doing, or is somebody worth listening to? And ethos, credibility, can come about by speaking in a way which references your accomplishments or your experiences, or referencing certain anecdotes that makes you look like somebody who knows what they're doing. So for example, during the conversation, telling a story like, out of all my clients, I find one common problem they experience is ... So even it doesn't have to be like, I am Crystal and I have 10 years of experience in doing this. But if you say things like, generally how, when my clients come to me, how I help them with stuff like this is ABC, it kind of subtly gives that, message that I know what I'm doing and I've encountered lots of these situations, I have lots of stories to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the third persuasive appeal is pathos, and this you're very good at, Greg.
Yeah, this is about creating an emotional connection through your story from person to person that makes you memorable.
Memorable.
Creating an emotional connection through your story, through your sharing, that makes you memorable to the person, because otherwise it's just a story that goes in and out and doesn't have any stickiness to them.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. How do we actually generate this connection on these 3 levels? Okay, firstly, I'm going to start off with logic or logos. Now, one way to improve the substance of your message is to actually use metaphors. And metaphors are very evocative imagery, unusual ways of describing things. So for example, if I'm talking to you, Greg, and you're telling me about some new software that you just bought half price, I might say, wow, it's like you got a Ferrari for the price of a Toyota. Or if somebody's telling me that they had a very, very busy week, I might say, wow, it sounds like you were air traffic controller this week, right? Or I might use metaphors like, this week I just felt like I was like a plastic bag, being tossed here and there by the wind,
Plastic bag.
A plastic bag, yeah. So, but I normally find that by using these sort of like imagery or metaphors, it makes people like remember what I'm saying, and because they are very visual, it tends to stick in people's minds.
Yeah, I can't get rid of the image of you as a plastic bag.
Have you ever felt like a plastic bag
floating in the wind? Hey, they charge for plastic bags now, you know that.
Tip number 2, read, and read. I find that a lot of times people don't know what to say because they tend to be very narrow in their interests. Now, Greg, you're somebody who reads a lot. The last thing you do before you go to sleep is read the Spiegel, the newspaper, or New York Times.
Yeah, I've just been curious in general. So I might read about, space travel. I might read about how to decarbonize the ocean, or, what the latest politicians are up to. And it gives me reference points that I can potentially weave into any other conversation.
Yeah, like I don't read the news as much as you do because I find that the news stresses me out, but I have a ton of different people I follow who are experts on different topics, whether it's career, whether it's like social media, whether it's like, I don't know, whether it's fashion, whether it's science. And I subscribe to a ton of newsletters as well to keep myself current. So reading is super important because when you're interested, you are interesting. So by being interested in many different topics, it naturally means that wherever the conversation flows, you have something to say, you have an opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And don't be scared of an opinion. I think sometimes, a lot of times, Singaporeans, we tend to grow up in this culture where we don't tend to debate a lot. So sometimes we're not used to giving opinions. But start off with having an opinion with your friends, your family members, before you start practicing having a controversial opinion with a senior stakeholder. That might not be a great place to start practicing, but definitely start small with your friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the next one is to ask interesting and evocative questions. So normally I like to ask questions that are interesting for the other person to answer. For example, what's one secret passion project that you're working on at the moment, if you can share? Or Greg, what's a question you like to ask?
Or really any kind of question that gets them to reflect and share and go deeper in whatever they started talking about. So if they're talking about the job that they're doing, ask them what do they enjoy most about their job. Or if they've just moved to Singapore, for instance, ask them what has been the biggest challenge so far? What are they enjoying most about being Singapore? Where are they from? And how was that transition? So just helping them go deeper in their sharing.
Yeah, so I also noticed that one thing everyone likes to give for free is opinions and advice. So sometimes I'll ask somebody for very specific advice that's easy for them to give. Like, oh, you live around the Newton hawker center area, what's your favorite place to eat, for example? Or it could be, hey, you've been around this industry for 10 years. What do you wish you had known when you were starting out? So very specific sort of questions, asking for advice often helps the other person feel like you respect them, you value them, and it actually brings you closer to the other person.
Yeah, or it allows you to perhaps combine certain topics. Let's say I'm particularly interested in AI. This is the latest thing I've been reading. I read some articles on whatever in the newspaper, and this person is from a legal workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I might then ask them like, hey, how is AI moving into your job? And how is that challenging, and how is that exciting for you?
Okay, let's move on into ethos, which is credibility. How do we actually amp up our credibility? So one way I like to do this is share specific stories of how I added value over the past, 1 week, 1 month. So it could be like, if you're in client-facing role, oh, let me share with you, I had this really interesting client who had this problem, and it was such an interesting problem. Let me share with you how we solved it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a story about you yourself. If you feel self-conscious, it could be a story of like how your team helped solve some interesting problem. Or it could be some sort of perspective that you have through working in the field that you are. For instance, you could say, well, working in cybersecurity, I find the number one mistake that people make with their passwords is ... So again, sharing these sort of like insider tips, really is interesting for other people when their brains hear like insider tips, what I have learned from 10 years on the job, like what the secret tricks of a psychologist are. It's almost like you're kind of like creating for them a mental TikTok, and they're gonna get like hooked into this experience. Let's move on to pathos, which is, I feel, the part where people really struggle in Asian context.
Mm-hmm.
Pathos is emotional connection. How do you make conversation that makes people feel that they resonate with you? And a lot of times, this is not about the words that you say, right, Greg?
Mhm.
It's about like actually your energy, your tone of voice, your body language. And you might think that energy is kind of like a hippie woo-woo thing to talk about. But you know, every single time I've talked to a senior stakeholder, pitch them something, talk to them about something, one thing they always comment on is, Crystal, I love your energy. I love the vibe that you and Greg have. I love the passion that comes through. So energy is something that is a rare commodity. And how do you make your energy come through in your voice? Can you see I'm making my voice sound excited and interested through stressing certain words and, you know, changing the tone of my voice, as opposed to speaking in a monotone where everyone will just fall asleep.
Yeah, of course, it means being animated in your body movements, using gestures, leaning in, smiling, opening your eyes as you're listening to the other person, nodding if they're sharing something. All that signals to the other person that you're excited, excitable, curious, really involved in the conversation.
You know, when I was doing equity sales on the trading floor, I always remember that I had a colleague and he used to smile all the time when he was talking to clients, and I thought it looked absolutely ridiculous. And then I noticed that when he smiled when he was talking, you can hear the smile. Like, can you hear? I'm smiling when I'm talking to you, and even though some of you may not be able to see me, you can actually hear the smile in my voice.
Yeah, and smile and people's energy is contagious. So if somebody smiles, I'm likely to smile back. If somebody has positive, upbeat energy, it's going to impact me and also bring my energy up.
Greg, you're also very good at one thing, which is making sounds.
Right? Like what?
Okay, this is a family friendly.
You may overshare.
Okay, so let me overshare a story. When we were stuck in quarantine during COVID in a hotel room,
Once upon a time,
we had 21 days in the same hotel room, and Greg was doing therapy in the toilet, okay? Because he had
converted the toilet into my little office in the office.
Yeah, he put a chopping board over the sink in the toilet, and he put his laptop there, and he would have all his therapy sessions on Zoom in this toilet. And because I was so close to him, I could overhear sometimes, like, you know, certain things going on in the toilet. And I noticed that this guy, every time I walked past the toilet, he didn't seem to be saying words. He seemed to be making sounds like, oh, yeah. I was like,
doesn't quite sound like that, but little indicators, verbal, like.
I was like, Greg, people pay you this money to go and hear these sounds, and I always felt like, for me, when my coaching clients come to me, I have to say all these amazing, witty, profound things, and then, you know, it makes them feel like they got their money's worth. But I learned from Greg that actually a lot of people just want to feel listened to. They want to feel that resonance between you and them. And actually what helps them feel that resonance is sometimes not words, but those sounds that you make.
Absolutely.
Please demonstrate.
Right. Okay. Yes. Tell me more. All these put the ball back into the other purple's court.
Person's court. Greg, you are also somebody who's very sincere. I feel like sometimes people may say these things and like they're just going through the motions, but like actually how do you listen to so many people every day and be genuinely curious and like sincere?
Well, I think it all really begins with the intention of wanting to understand them, wanting to really get a sense of who they are and what they're going through and how whatever is going on in their lives. So
I think you're just a nicer person than me, lah.
Do you know this was a competition?
Okay, one last thing I want to talk about is talking about highest principles. And this combines ethos with pathos. It combines, you know, your own reputation along with making emotional connection. And how this works is by thinking of 3 values that you really would love people to associate with you. So for example, integrity, maybe it's hardworking, maybe it's passionate, and it's, if you have these 3 values words, it's about constantly referencing to them. So you might say in conversation like, as someone who's very passionate about integrity, I believe that, our stance on AI should be ... So, or you could say, well, I'm somebody who really cares about matters of integrity, which is why, I find your take on this so interesting. But what you're doing is constantly kind of referencing as someone who is insert those values, and you're kind of like branding yourself a certain way. For example, I have a friend who's constantly talking about women and empowering other women, and she wants to be thought of as a powerful woman. And she constantly shares on LinkedIn stories about powerful woman, empowerment, and she kind of like subtly in my mind at least has branded herself very effectively as somebody who's associated with empowerment. Sometimes people say reputation is what people say about you when you've left the room. So Greg, when you are not in the room, what do you hope people describe you as if you had to pick like a few words?
Well, other than amazing, of course, I think people think I'm a really good listener. That I have a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
Easy to connect with.
Yeah. So I think spend some time thinking about what kind of conversationalist you'd like to be known as, because everyone has different styles. For me, I'm provocative, I am funny, I'm insightful, I think at least. And that's the kind
Humble.
of very humble. And, that's the kind of like, conversation that I hope to be able to have with people. But, it's also about taking these tips that we've shared with you and using them to augment your own natural style. You may not apply all of them. You might just take one or two, but I think it's also really important to find that intersection of what, advice other people give you and what is your own style and your own authenticity.
Absolutely, and don't let any fear get in the way.
Okay, so with that in mind, I hope that you've learned some helpful tips about convincing other people that you are an influential, exciting, sparkling conversationalist. Everything from using metaphors and colorful language and amping up your energy, smiling when you see people, reading more, talking about client anecdotes or things or problems that you've helped solve. All this good stuff. Remember to take some of it, one or two principles, and apply it in your life. Good luck with it and let us know how it goes.
Yeah, have fun.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.